Okay. Today, September 2nd, 2020, I, Maya Hill, the interviewer, will be interviewing Miss Cynthia Bayette Torres. Location is over Zoom, and the project is the Black Student Alumni Oral History Project. So welcome, Miss Cynthia Torres. I'm
Thank
so
you.
happy to have you and so honored to actually be doing this interview with you. So just to dive in, where are you from and where, where were you born? When were you born? Just a little bit of background about you.
Okay. Okay. I was born in Brooklyn, New York, but spent most of my life in Philadelphia with most of my maternal family, my mother's family, father, mother, many sisters, one brother, and so forth. So that's where I grew up. Starting out in North Philadelphia, my mother's family, they owned rental properties, they owned stores, they lived there. And then in the 50s, little by little, we moved to Northwest Philadelphia. My grandparents moved, and then all their children moved sort of in a circle around them. And that's where I grew up.
What year were you born?
I was born in 1948, April 27th, 1948. Yes.
Okay. So growing up during a period of kind of like the inching in this beginning of like the civil rights movement, not there yet, but the inching towards the civil rights movement. What kind of things did you experience while growing up? Forms of discrimination, whether it be in school or in your community? Like, what was the climate in your neighborhood at that
Okay.
time?
Where I lived in the beginning, I lived with my grandparents for much of my childhood until I was about 11. We were always in changing neighborhoods. Whites were moving out. The Jewish store owners were turning over their stores to African Americans or just leaving that neighborhood. So that was in North Philadelphia in the 40s. And then in the 50s, 1956, my grandparents moved to a neighborhood called Mount Airy, which was a little leafier and greener. And so I watched as the whites moved out and the blacks moved in. Interestingly, Mount Airy, though, organized itself and remains an integrated neighborhood. They put effort forth to keep some of the whites from running off. And so it remained an integrated neighborhood. It is kind of recognized as such to this day. And so that's where I grew up. That's it. And as far as the movement, little by little, you're right, it was progressing. And my family was the type where if one aunt heard something on the radio, she would call everybody else, turn on WDS, turn on WHAT, turn on. And I think when Nat King Cole got a 15-minute show, oh my goodness, they just went crazy. Turn on the TV. Oh, and that went on always. And then we heard different speakers as I was growing up, and Malcolm X is on the radio, Martin Luther King, and so forth. When I got into high school, I got involved with an organization, and I think it was a friend of mine whose parents were very much into community activities who got her involved in an organization called Fellowship House. And it was a Quaker organization. And in Philadelphia, the Quakers have always been a major part of the movement from, I think even Martin Luther King did some studies with the Quakers as part of his Bible studies way back when, and may have actually begun to learn about nonviolent protests as part of that. But at any rate, we started going there after school as teenagers to keep us out of trouble. And so it was, again, back to North Philadelphia, Girard Avenue, Fellowship House. We would go there from Germantown High School, where I was in high school. And I stuck with them. The friend that actually brought me into it did not stick with it, but I did. And they had international students living there. They had classes after school where you learned about the world and about movements and such. And through that, in my senior year in high school, Martin Luther King came to Philadelphia. Fellowship House hosted him for a breakfast. I was part of the high school group that participated in planning for his visit. And I got to serve him coffee, and I was very nervous. And I remember him looking up at me like, please don't spill that. No, he didn't say anything. He just, I'm sure he was prayerful as I was taking the coffee. But anyway, I did that. And I'm not sure if it was at that visit that there was picketing at what had been a segregated school for boys, Girard College. But I believe that was part of that visit. But it was all I was very drawn in by the problems around the world, by the Jewish-Arab conflict, which we would talk about at Fellowship House. There were a couple of students from, I believe it was Iraq, and things started to break apart into Black Power movement and various things. And one piece of that was that these Iraqi students could not accept the kind of Zionism of some of the folks that were involved in. So a conflict started there, just a gentle conflict, but it foreshadowed the whole Black Power movement, kind of separating from the nonviolent path. But interestingly, there were not a lot of high school students involved. It was a very small group, a few Black students, a few white students, a few visiting students. And so when I got to Penn State, they saw me as radical, because most folks there in 1965 were not thinking about all of that. But somehow I grew up with that. As I mentioned, my cousin Amelia Platts Boynton was very involved in the voter rights activities in Selma. And that summer of 65 was a bloody Sunday. She and many others were beaten. And I remember seeing a picture of her in the newspaper, like unconscious. She had been beaten. And while I hadn't seen her for some years, she had visited my grandparents sometime before. That was another thing. There were just these series of things that led me to be very awake and aware as far as the movement, as far as protests, as far as African Americans' place in this country. So I arrived at Penn State radical. Oh my goodness. It wasn't easy at first because I didn't have much company. I did have, and I was not on the main campus my first year. I was on the Mont Alto campus up in the Blue Ridge Mountains. And it was interesting. There were 6 Black girls up there. one was from Pittsburgh, and 3 or 4 were from Philadelphia, and one was from somewhere else in Pennsylvania, like a smaller town, I believe. And then there were several hundred white students. And they weren't unkind to us necessarily, but we were just so isolated. I went from, Philadelphia, subways, and, kind of wild goings on at my high school sometimes, to the countryside of Western Pennsylvania, and just 6 Black girls, and it was different. It was challenging.
So before I ask that one, did you know what you wanted to be before, like once you got involved in youth activism in high school? Did you know what you wanted to be and how you wanted to be involved in going to going to college in some form or way in activism? Did you know, like, because you mentioned you knew your place and African Americans' place within, the country as a whole, and also placement within, different groups and in schooling. So did you know exactly what you wanted to do or what you wanted to become before entering college?
Yeah, I'd say I was probably as confused or undetermined as many of us were. There was changing of majors many times. There are a lot of dualities. Some things were more on target than others. One of the reasons I encouraged you to get credit or get paid or something for this effort is that a lot of the things that I did that were really rewarding up there, I didn't get any academic credit for it. It didn't even occur to me. I was just so gung-ho to do some things. And we did raise money to do a day in the life, the Montage. We did ask for contributions from the different departments. We were wise enough to do that. I think, in some ways I had some information. I had some family members who were very involved in the movement, and other family members who would very much talk about how things used to be when they were in the South, and talk about unfairness and this and that. But I was still, 17. I was actually kind of young when I went to college. And so there's that whole immature going on.
Yeah.
And some quarters I did well, and others I was out conducting the revolution and not going to class. So what can I say?
Yeah. So how did you end up hearing about Penn State, especially Mount Alto campus? The first time I heard about Mount Alto campus was this summer. I had a friend who ended up currently at main campus. She went to Mount Alto campus, and I was like, where is that? And she lives in Fort Loudoun, so it's kind of like right by her house.
Oh,
and
okay.
She was like, oh yeah, it's here. And I'm like, I never even heard, I never been here before. I'm from Delaware, so I don't really go to certain parts, all over Pennsylvania. So how did you hear about Penn State? And did you have any family members who went to college or a vocational school before you ended up going?
Yeah, there was some. My mother did maybe a semester at Temple. One of my aunties went to Virginia Union for a couple of years, and then she got her MRS degree. She got married and got school, and she's in her 90s now going, darn, I should have stayed in school. My dad had very limited education. My stepfather, on the other hand, went to Pitt, went to Howard. I had a mixed bag of family members who did some educational things, and it was understood that there was no question about whether I was going to college or not. Mm-hmm. There was no plan like you're going to study this or that, or you're going to. And so Penn State was kind of recruiting African-American students, not in a big way, but just sort of a little bit. And so there were a few of us from my high school that ended up going to Penn State. I never applied to anywhere else that I can recall. I guess I applied and they accepted me. I was like, Penn State says I can come, okay. That was basically the extent of, I was like, oh good, because I was going to college. I mean, it was
so did you have any other choices in mind, like a HBCU, since your stepdad went to Howard, or any of? No.
No, not really. And I don't know why. I would say part of it was my family dynamic at that point. My stepfather was ill and we didn't really know it. And so there was the family energy was kind of going off. And I told my mother I was accepted at Penn State. She's like, great, check. Don't have to worry anymore about that. Go clean your room was kind of basically the way that worked. So no, there was just not a lot of thought in my home about where else I might go or whatever. And I think it was because my stepfather was at the beginning of his illness at that point. And so my mother was just like, if it's done, if you're accepted, done. We don't have to deal with any, we'll get you a trunk, get your supplies, take you up there. You're in college. So.
Now, with the acceptance, did you receive, since they were recruiting for African-American students, did you receive any form of scholarship or any incentive for you to come to the university?
No, because the cost was so low then. I think it's difficult for students now because the costs are so high. They can't conceive of, we went there and I don't know, it was a few $100s a quarter or something. I mean, it was maybe 300 and something a quarter and $250 for room and board. Wow. So there was no thought of it. I took a student loan at the end because that was the thing. And it was very small. It was like $2,000 or something. And it wasn't that I really needed it. It was just that it was being promoted. And it has ended up being what I consider a disaster of major debt that has become part of going to college. And, it's unfortunate. Back then, oh my goodness, it was nothing.
Yeah, I wish my tuition was about $400.
Yeah, it was incredibly low, and it just wasn't an issue. My mother and stepfather and father kind of took turns, paying for stuff, and it was a good fortune in that way. It was very good fortune. Now, the cultural shock of being in the middle of nowhere the first year, and then Penn State main campus the next, it was all shocking to me. I'm like, what? Where am I? But, when I got up to the University Park, there were about 200 Black students, maybe not even 200. I think we would celebrate every time it got, really to that point. And so you ran up to people, hi, who are you? You know, the Black students just reached out to each other. And then the sororities and fraternities ended up being the core of our social structure. Again, going up there as a semi-revolutionary, I didn't really plan to pledge, but you know, after a while, that's where the socializing was. It really wasn't much else other than that. So I did end up pledging AKA. But what was interesting about, I don't know if you're a Delta, but that's okay. Because quite frankly, I could have been a Delta because there were so few of us.
Yeah.
We were, you know, right now, my get-togethers from Penn State are Deltas and AKAs and anybody else that we happen to find. Hey, you were there. Come, let's all go to dinner. Quite different from when I went to visit friends at, like, I had a friend at Howard and went to visit, I mean, Deltas, AKA, you know. Like, really? Because we all just party together because there's nobody else there. So I don't know. What did you pledge? Or
yeah, so I pledged fall 19. So it was just like just recent last year.
Oh.
Yeah. So I mean,
and you are
I'm a Delta.
Okay.
Oh, I thought you because you said, because I was coughing the first, I was like and you're like, I know you're a Delta. So I was like, oh, okay, she already knows. And
no, I kind of thought maybe, you know.
Oh, you assumed. Wow. You know what they say about Delta women. We carry ourselves with prestige.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But
no, Kamala.
Oh, yeah. All right, next question. So you mentioned culture shock, you know, when you got to the Mount Alto campus and then also University Park campus. So what year did you start at Penn State? Since it was a quarterly semester at Mount Alto, and then what was your freshman year experience like? What kind of classes did you take? What were your interests at the time? Because you did mention you changed your major quite a few times. So what was your major at that time?
Well, I'm not sure if I declared a major that first year. I just took a lot of, because Mount Alto at that point, the academic offerings were pretty limited. They just were mostly giving you the basic requirements that you would have to have no matter what going forward, because their primary offerings were surveying and what was the other thing? Oh, well, I don't remember. But anyway, surveying course, a 2-year surveying course, and some other course of study. And they were just beginning to add the academic year, first year studies there. Mm-hmm. So it probably took, I don't know, history, English, you know, basics stuff that you would have to take. A couple of like softball or, you know, whatever. Just basics, because that's all Mount Alto was for then. There were no advanced courses being offered there. It was just automatic. I think they had started to use some of the specialized campuses, which Mount Alto was, for academics to take the overflow of students, because main campus was getting so crowded. So now Mount Alto may have full 2, 3, 4 year offerings, I don't know, but then they only had 1 year, and then you automatically would go to the main campus or somewhere else that had some of the advanced courses. So it's pretty basic.
So what did, oh, sorry.
Go on.
No, I wanted you to finish. Or you said pretty basic first year. Is that all?
Yeah, Mount Alto was kind of introductory college.
Okay.
Um,
So did you experience any, of course I know that they were present, but um, any disparities or any form of discrimination when your freshman year or even transitioning over when you got to main campus? Like, I know those things were present, you know, being a minority on the campus, and racial tensions high within the nation at the time, but then also on university campuses. Student activism was at, you know, a peak around 1968, beginning like 1967, around that time. So, like, did you notice disparities that were
well,
there?
Penn State was pretty removed. Um, things would be going on at other places well ahead of when things would come to Penn State.
Hmm.
Penn State was pretty isolated, and so I would have to say when I went to Mont Alto, I don't remember experiencing any overt, outright racial issues or tensions. I think we were more regarded as like unusual. Most of the students there maybe had never seen a Black person before. They were farm kids and rural Pennsylvania kids and upstate whatever. And so there wasn't that. And then when I went to the main campus, again, I didn't feel a lot of outright racial tension because we were such a small percentage of the students. It was more of just overlooking us. Like, yeah, you know, we were not paid any great attention, I think, by the larger majority. I mean, there were 20-some thousand students at main campus, and there, on a lucky day, there were 190 Black students sprinkled among that 26,000. So I think you get more racial tensions when the number begins to grow, which I think began to happen as I was leaving. I went there, went to Mont Alto in fall of '65. Okay, so out in the world, as I said, with Selma, the Bloody Sunday, the marches, and all that out in the world. But Penn State was its own little world.
Yeah.
And with just a sprinkling of us here and there, they could just ignore pretty much whatever else was going on. Thankfully, each year, the African American students became more aware and started doing more things, and so we could not be ignored. So I would say by the time I left there, we had taken steps. We had the Montage, the Douglas Association was formed. The Black Arts Festival happened. There were a couple of faculty who were hired, African American faculty hired to work with us to deal with, we're getting a little out of control. And so that by the time I left campus in '69, I think that's a period I noticed from some of your notes where you're focusing a lot on what happened 69, 70, 71, whatever. And things changed quickly and escalated in a way that when I first got there, they were just like, oh, a Black person, well, or Negro. We were Negroes in '65. Then we went from Negroes to Black. And then by the time I left, I was thinking, gee, we really ought to be called African Americans because it's a more honest description of who we are. So, and then what you're talking about in Harrisburg, and, you know, that's when things were starting to bubble up at Penn State. They had bubbled up out in the world, 5, 6, maybe 10 years before that. So there you go.
Yeah, so after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., how was campus at that point? Because you mentioned in 68, kind of like 69 was the turning point at Penn State, but I know I read in the Daily Collegian that they held a visual, and after that event, it kind of sparked more student activism on campus per se. And I could be wrong in my readings of the Daily Collegian article, but it was, expressed as that was the heightening point or the beginning to student activism and the protests that were held by African American students on campus. So like, what was that, I guess, time period like that semester like, or quarterly? I don't know I guess it was a semester at the time.
I don't know. I think we were still doing quarters, but you can, I'm not sure. But what was kind of odd for me is, again, I was already involved in this, in the outside world, in the movement, before I arrived at Penn State. And so it always seemed like folks were catching up with me. Mm-hmm. And I appreciated it after a while that we were actually almost on the same page. I wasn't seen as kind of this odd militant, which was kind of funny because out in the wider world, I was not the most militant by any stretch. But things did.
Okay.
I think you have to view Penn State from the core of its isolation and its things happening in a kind of different time frame than, say, other places. For example, you were asking about building the brick wall. Mm-hmm. That was something that was done, I believe, at Cornell University. And we became aware of it. And I know I was one of the folks that thought it would be a good idea to, do this in the president's office. And what I liked about that was that students became involved who were not normally in our little rabble-rousing group. Our arts, I was in the artsy plays, drama group, and then there were some others like Rick, who was more political, sciencey. But the folks who had to get involved in building the brick wall in the president's office were the engineering students, who were like the least involved in any of this. And I thought that was a real positive thing. They actually had to lead us in building the wall, because we could all hold a brick, but none of drama students and political science majors had any idea how to make this thing stand up. So the engineering students, Ray Skinner is a name I remember who he kind of directed the building of the wall in the president's office. But it was something we copied from Cornell, who had done it well ahead of our activity.
So what did the black brick on the top represent for?
Well, that was power. That was
I understood. Yeah.
Power to the people.
Yeah, but I knew that, but I was just wondering, especially what you were trying to express to the president, trying to get President Walker's attention at the time, and it was also attached with, or on the black brick was attached the 13 demands. I read that in the Daily Collegian article, but I could, like I said, it may not be fully.
Well, I think you have to talk to someone else who was more a leader in the Dutch Association. I ended up being the leader in the cultural side of things. And I think Rick and maybe Ted and some others were more in leadership on that political side. Honestly, I haven't revisited a lot of these things for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just started kind of remembering some stuff as I was getting ready to talk to you. But anyway, yeah, Penn State was behind the curve of activism.
Mm.
But I think it quickly tried to catch up, I'd say between 68, 69, and 70, 71. And I was not on campus anymore.
So jumping to, kind of out of student activism into other activities that were brought on campus. So we talked about the Montage, and that was an event that was led by you. So could you talk a little bit about that and how that, came to be on campus and why that was such an important event? And also, was it during Arts Fest or before Arts Fest?
No, it was the year before.
Okay.
The Montage was in May of 68, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And the Arts Festival was the following spring. Mm-hmm. So Montage kind of led to the Arts Festival happening. The Arts Festival was kind of grew out of it and was much larger and more complicated production. Mm-hmm. Montage was something that kind of grew in my dorm room. And part of the
Where did you live,
was that
by the way?
In North Halls.
Okay.
And we're again, maybe 10, 15 of us in North Halls, 5 or 6 girls, 7 or 8 guys of African-American heritage. That was it. And my roommate, Shelly Todd, she was also pretty much of an activist too. But one of the things that led to the Montage for me, I was auditioning, and I think they did cast me as a maid. And then I was cast in this other Bluebird thing, and I just wanted to do something. I was involved in theater, in Freedom Theater in Philadelphia, and that was very active, and you get good parts and this and that. And I wanted something more. Mm-hmm. And so I don't remember exactly what led to choosing the Montage concept, but we just did it. And I started pulling out the poetry books and writing to get permission to use poems and writings, and we just did it out of need because there had to be more than these little penny ante parts they were giving me in the drama department. And so that's what it grew out of, and it grew out of the music. I had Nina Simone and whatever else we used. I have to apologize. I should have had the program here so I could reference it for you. But
no, it's okay.
We were doing what we needed to do to survive up there and to feel connected to the outside world. And again, we held auditions, and we were able to get some folks involved who were not necessarily quite as revolutionary or quite as involved. Donna Fields did the artwork for the flyers and the program, and various other folks auditioned and ended up performing. Mm. And some of them were business majors, and one fellow I know went on to be a pilot in the Air Force or Army or whatever. And so it was a wonderful experience. There was music and poetry and all kinds of.
So what were some of what were some of the poetry pieces that you used, if you could remember, even if it was just like one?
Well, if you want to take a break, I'll go get the program and then I can give it to you. If you don't, otherwise it would have been. We went to classics like We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar. We Langston Hughes, Sonia Sanchez. We even did something that was Bill Cosby's. Interesting. Richard Wright, James Baldwin, Leroy Jones, Don Lee, Margaret Walker from her book. She wrote the book Jubilee, I believe. We did, use some of her work. Mississippi Goddamn, of course, was music, Nina Simone. And would appear that that's the way we ended it, on Mississippi Goddamn.
Well, I mean, one of the most popular Nina Simone songs, so that was one. I was going to ask if that was a song played, because that was one that probably the only Nina Simone song that I've heard that was used in, some of my history classes. So I do know of that song. But so I guess with Montage, being the year before Arts Fest, you mentioned that, it was something necessary for, or it had to be done for survival for, African American students. Could you like break that down a little bit? Like the term survival, like a Black community or a Black event was necessary for other African American students, including yourself, to feel like a part of the community, or reestablishing another community?
I think to feel part of the movement that was far away from Penn State. To bring us into alignment with some of our with other students at other universities, with folks who were marching, to just bring us into the movement, to make us feel a part of, connected to the larger world. Again, that mountaintop we were on, the Nittany Mountain, very isolated. Mm-hmm. And individually we were isolated because there weren't so many of us. So for me, this was just a desperate reach for something that would make me feel spiritually more connected, healthier, to do something that was more rewarding than the little parts I was able to audition for and get in the drama department. And I wanted to share, I felt I had a very positive experience with Fellowship House and some of the marches and things that I had participated in before I arrived at Penn State. And so I wanted to share that. And the poetry, a lot of people were not aware of these poems, aware of the books that we pulled some material from. And a lot of people didn't like Nina Simone as much as I did. So, and again, even the title, A Day in the Life, was pulled from a song title, a jazz song title, which I'd have to check on the exact.
That's fine.
But all of what we were doing was trying to say all of these things that we're going to talk about, the poems we're going to share, could occur in a day in life of our community. And, but the need to feel connected to more than just what was going on at Penn State was at the core of why it was done. And I just had a great time doing this. I have letters that I dug up. I was like, oh my gosh, from Yale University Press, who's we wrote for permissions. We were just trying to do things on the up and up. We wrote to Dell Publishing to get permission to use pages 43 to 46 from Blues for Mr. Charlie by James Baldwin. And and then Tico Campbell and somebody green delivered the line. And who else? Where else? Harper and Row Publishers. I wrote to, or Shelley and I wrote to get permission to use pages 3 through 9 from Native Son by Richard Wright in A Day in the Life. What else? We wrote to Yale University Press to get a permission to use the poem We Have Been Believers from For My People by Margaret Walker, and so on. These are the ones I could find. And then we also asked departments at Penn State to give us money for things. Like if anything costs, you know, whatever. So, yeah, it was probably one of my best times at Penn State. And then I did learn how to swim, which I am grateful. I don't know if they do that anymore, but that was one of the, I mean, I feel fortunate that I went to college, and I do appreciate some of the things, particularly like anthropology, which I knew nothing about and discovered maybe I should have majored in anthropology. But I learned to swim. Do they still require that?
No, you don't have to know how to swim, but I think they do offer swim lessons.
Yeah. When I went there, you could not graduate if you could not swim a certain, like across the pool or whatever. You had to pass a swimming test to graduate. Wow. You would see people in their last quarter of their senior year in the pool every day trying to learn to swim to pass that test. I look at it now, I think it's brilliant. Yeah. I think, why not? But now it's up to you.
Yeah, now that those are not requirements. I know you need like a gym credit or some form of like physical activity credit, but swimming, I don't think swimming, maybe it is one of the things, but I don't think it is a requirement. Like, so me, I decided to take a biobehavioral health class instead of doing any type of sports, because so this is a side note, but I'm a runner, so I run all the time by myself. And I was just like, I don't want to be trained by I don't want to do any of these physical activity things. So I found my way of getting out of it by doing something that I'm finding a course that I was really interested in. So it kind of paid off, but I do know you need some type of health gym type of credit, but it's not, swimming is not a specific thing that you need in order to graduate, one specific thing. So times have changed. I'm happy that's not one of the things on there. I mean, I know how to swim, but I will feel for people who didn't know how to swim. Like, you get to the end of like you said, your senior year, but that's like with classes, you can get to your senior year and not know you missed one or something like that. So it's like the same thing, but that would kind of be doomsday for a lot of people. But so just kind of wrapping up here, after you graduated from Penn State, and I do want to kind of get this on the recording because you did mention it to me the first time we talked, but you decided not to attend graduation. So kind of like explaining what was those reasons, and then deciding not to pay to get your diploma as well, since you didn't attend the graduation. Just kind of briefly explaining, what were your kind of reasons behind, those things.
Well, not attending, that was part of the revolution. I mean, we were so detached from or at least I was. Other people said they were detached, but they went to classes that I skipped, and they went to graduation that I skipped. But it was just another way to protest, to say, I don't have to be there. And I know I'm not the only one that did that, because someone mentioned recently, I don't remember which of my sorors it was, that they didn't go either. But I didn't feel attached to Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
I felt I did what I needed to do to finally graduate. I took my chemistry class at community college in Philadelphia so I could check that box and not have tortured at Penn State. So it was part of us, was not going to have to be marching down the aisle and saying that I was so glad I had gone to Penn State, because at that point I was not so glad. Mm-hmm. There were many, many years I really regretted having to have been isolated like that, and having to fight to have a good drama experience, and to be the oddball because I was a little bit militant, and it was mm-hmm. almost until I left campus before anybody else joined me in that. So I just said, I'm not going. And then when I wanted to get the paper, they said, well, send your $3 and you can have it. So I said, eh. So finally, it may have been my mother or somebody who said, where is it? So and finally, in the March or so of 1971, that's when I received my degree, because I sent in my $3. And they
so what did you end up getting your degree in?
Oh, general arts and science. What else was left? I had taken courses of every kind. General arts and science, which was their version of a liberal arts degree, which was fine. I mean, mm-hmm. Not really having received a lot of direction as to what to do with it. It was just go to college. Okay, mm-hmm. That was going to solve everything. And then I was kind of an artsy person, so that worked out. I mean, I was into the theater and journalism a little bit, and I was artsy, and so that was appropriate in the end. General arts and science, yeah.
That's good. So like I said, as we kind of tie up here, I have 2 more questions for you.
Okay.
In regards to legacy, what legacy do you think that you left on Penn State, whether it be through the Montage or whether it be through your, your militant stance, or your involvement in different protests or other forms of activism, or even just being a student at that time, bearing through your 4 years or your quarterly system at Penn State?
Mm-hmm. My legacy. Well, I was there. Sometimes that's what counts. I was there. I know they continue to try to recruit more African Americans. I know issues and challenges of people of color being on campus continued. I've been able to make use of some things I learned there to be a better mother, grandmother, person. Referencing back to that experience every so often, I learned something else that I didn't realize I had learned while I was there. So I guess that's all I can say. I never encouraged anyone to go there because I did not like the isolation that I felt when I was there. And so while I know maybe one or two of my classmates may have a daughter or son or whatever that went on to attend Penn State, very few that I know of went back or encouraged anyone to go there. Now, I do know one fellow who's very successful, who's donated to the school and is, on various committees. And there are probably a few folks from my era who are in that category. But you would have to talk to them about why they value the experience to the degree that they do.
Yeah, I think just even mentioning that you were there, because even in this, like being able to interview you and hear about your time at Penn State does reflect upon a legacy that you can even trickle down to, discuss with someone else. So I think being there is a big role of how you can also leave a legacy in a different way. Your legacy doesn't have to be left, in a way in which, a lot of people are making reference to it. But I think also, even if one person is able to make reference to something that you achieved, or even not make reference, but acknowledge something that you have achieved, or an experience that you had, and you are able to share with another person, I think that also transfers into some form of legacy that you are leaving with someone else, to continue and carry on. So the final question, and it's kind of, I think you kind of made a lot of reference to this earlier on about your time at Penn State. If you would summarize your college experience in a phrase, what would it be and why?
Phrase. Yeah, I did see that in your question, and it was like, what comes to mind? What comes to mind at the moment is don't walk away from a challenge. There were many days there I thought I was not going to make it. Mornings going to an 8 o'clock class and there's snow on the ground every single day. And I hate cold weather. But don't walk away from a challenge, because they're always going to be there. And also take control of the challenge. You have power. Usually you have more power, to do things than you think you do. And so I'd say that's what I learned. That's what doing a day in the life helped me understand, that as miserable as I was many days, and as little as I felt I was getting back, even though I was probably getting back more than I realized, I could do something about it. I could put my own show together. I could hold my own auditions. So Don't walk away from a challenge.
That good way to end us off. I don't know, how else to even come, what to say, but all I can do, what I can say is thank you for, this time and even your willingness to say yes to be interviewed for this project. I know you have other things probably going on, but just to sit aside an hour of your time to just kind of talk to me and talk about your experience is definitely honorable. And I know I've received a lot and learned a lot about, a time at Penn State that I can only read about. And even in reading about it, there were certain things that were missing. But to hear someone who was there, as you mentioned, talk about their experience, it's a different, I guess I have a different response, and I have a more appreciative attitude to the information that I am now granted to through your story. So, Miss Cynthia, I just want to say thank you again. And yeah, I'm truly grateful for this opportunity.
Well, I would like to thank you because you're the legacy. You're handling the legacy. I feel that in some ways we're handing off to you, and I just really appreciate your interest and your willingness to do this. And I think you'll appreciate it more as time goes by. I'm surprised that this happened. I appreciate it because obviously we still weren't being recognized, that you would come back and say, I don't know anything about all this. And to me, this was the biggest thing that happened the whole time I was there. And so if you want to do more, I don't know what this may lead to in terms of your work at Penn State. And, but let me know if there's anything in addition.